your experts in business throughout North Texas. 620 AM, KEXB.
All right, welcome back. Nothing like live radio, right?
Yeah, right. We can't blame it on the weather, unfortunately. So I think it's just technical difficulties.
Yeah, there you go. I wish I could. Jeff Pettegrew joining me, Chief Policy Officer over at ARAWC. All right, we are here at the 2018 Partner Source Employers Conference, which is an amazing event that really brings people from all across the state and gives people kind of an education process of just what are the alternatives to workers' comp.
Yeah, it's really an incredible opportunity for people here in Texas because Texas is an interesting state. It's the only state in the union that has a choice beyond workers' compensation. And it's a unique choice, and it's really benefited businesses in Texas and made the economy a booming economy. And other states are really looking at Texas saying, hey, wow, how can we do this?
Because we're actually doing things right here. Texas is a good place to do business, a good place to live. Great tax, obviously taxes are lower than most cross country, but there's a lot of states that could learn a lot from what we're doing here.
Well, it's really true. And, it got my attention a long time ago. I've been in business for almost 40 years, working workers' compensation programs in 40 different states and running the major programs in California as a CEO. And operating like $500 million worth of workers' compensation claims. And then I looked at Texas. I said, well, wait a second. What are they doing there? And make a long story short, I thought I was going to retire. And then they said, hey, we need a new spokesperson. They had now had one. And they called me up, and I said, I'm all in because you guys are doing something right.
And, of course, if you don't know the history of workers' compensation, this is probably one of the most interesting things I have heard in a long, long time. And pull up a chair and sit down because this is about to get really interesting. Tell me the history of workers' compensation.
Yeah, this is interesting because even the experts that I've known for many, many years in the business weren't familiar with the actual history of workers' compensation. And your listeners might find this kind of fascinating because it's not really taught in schools or in professional courses. But about 20 years ago, they discovered a tablet from ancient Sumeria. We're talking about 2050 BC. Okay, they discovered that society was one of the most advanced cultures in our history. Interestingly enough, and sure enough, they found in this one tablet evidence of an early workers' compensation system. And you say, well, how do you know that? Because it said, hey, if you hurt your finger, if you lose your finger, it's 30 shekels. If you lose your hand, it's 60 shekels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, my gosh, what do we got here? The earliest form of written workers' compensation program that we know of in history.
Came from the pirates.
Well, we're getting to the pirates later. Yeah. So that's 2050 BC.
BC.
Okay, so then history goes along. We have a feudal system, and with the exception of benevolent feudal lords who might do something for their injured workers, there was really no written, codified set of laws that would resemble modern-day workers' compensation. But then around 1700s, starting with Captain Morgan, which we've heard of, sure. I'm not talking about the rum, I'm talking about the actual captain of the pirate, privateer. In order to get people to serve on the ship, which we would call pirates, they had to lure them, okay? I mean, what's in it for me, right? So people may or may not know that whatever booty they collected, okay, treasures they collected, they shared. They actually did share. You got your own share. But what happened if you get injured? And, they had a lot of fights going on, sword battles and battles with cannons, and so you'd lose a leg or an arm or whatever. So they came up with this interesting system. And by the way, and so we emulate this today. So what they would say is an example is that, well, we'll give you 100 pieces of 8 if you lose your hand. Okay, 100 pieces of 8. What was 100 pieces of 8 in those days? That was an annual salary in the early U.S.
So if you lost your leg for whatever reason, combat, just deploy. We're going to give you enough salary for your entire year.
And as a matter of fact, if you lost your arm, which was your fighting arm, it'd be 600 pieces of 8, which would be 6 years, equivalent of 6 years of pay. So, it's like, oh, okay, this sounds pretty good. I know I'm putting myself at risk, but they had that kind of a system where they actually prescribed a specific amount for this specific body part. And then what would they do? So after you got injured, You know, would they send you back to court? Well, then no. Then they'd find what we would call modified duty today or light duty today. They'd say, hey, can you cook? We'll make you a cook, or you can swab decks if you can't handle the cannons or you can't handle the swords. So they came up with a really interesting system that was their own system. It wasn't a governmental system. And so they got a lot of people to volunteer to go on those ships and be pirates, if you will, because of the system. And by the way, if you died, good luck. You didn't get paid anything.
Yeah, you get paid. But you had an interesting comment earlier that if you have an earring, the pirates wear earrings, right? And there's a reason for that. Now, this is really interesting.
Yeah, okay. So you went like, well, okay, is it Hollywood movies that they wear earrings? No. As a matter of fact, despite what you see in the movies, they hated to be buried at sea. I mean, that was the last thing they wanted to do. They wanted to be shipped back to their homeland. Well, who's going to do that, and why would they do that? The guy's gone, okay? So they put a silver or a gold earring in with their home port, and they yank it off the ear if the person died, and it would be a promise, a commitment to say, okay, we're going to take your ear as payment and take you back so you can get buried in your home port.
I love it. Jeff Pettegrew is our guest right now. We're talking to the Chief Policy Officer over at ARAWC. Okay, so but now it really gets serious in the early 1900s.
Right.
As far as now, let's transition into that part of the story.
Okay, this is kind of interesting too, and a lot of people don't realize this. So when did workers' comp really surface? Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a number of years, a couple hundred years since the pirates. Okay, so in 1884, Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, if you remember that name, in Prussia, was battling for his job, if you will, and the Marxists were really trying to overthrow him. And so he, and it's all credited to him, came up with this codified system of workers' accident insurance, as they called it then, and basically it's what we have today. So in other words, again, going back to the pirates and even Samaria, it's if you lose a body part, we measure that as to which, right down to the digit, what that's worth. We measure it by your age, your occupation. We also give you a continuation of wages in part. We pay for your medical and death benefits, and we rehabilitate you and get you back to work. So what does that look like? What is it? That's the workers' comp system.
Which is, if that was like the Jeopardy question, like how did it get started? Because, of course, we've come a long way since then, and not all states do it the right way, I guess you could say.
Well, here's what happened was people don't realize in history that the United States was going through a lot of political pressures in the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so we're talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s. And if you've read Upton Sinclair, Sinclair Lewis, and some of the writers of the time, the working conditions were horrendous. You know, they're just horrendous. So like in The Jungle, I mean, the book was intended to talk about an immigrant who was working in a meatpacking plant in Chicago. Most of us have read that book. And you know, he was really trying to push the socialist agenda to say that's really unfair the way they're treating that. You know what it did? It created the FDA. So, you know, because they were appalled at how sausage is made, if you will. So he didn't quite get what he wanted. But at that time, what it did is it opened the eyes of the public of saying, my gosh, the working conditions in these cities are terrible. The farmers and the people out in middle America really weren't aware of some of the horrendous working conditions. So then we started to see the movement, if you will, of interest in the workers' compensation system, because that system in Prussia had of course, merged into Germany, and then it went into the UK, into England, and then ultimately, in around 1908, the United States government decided it should apply that system to workers there. And here's the thing you need to know, which I haven't mentioned before, and it was true in all these systems. Once you have a system like workers' compensation in place, and we call it the grand bargain, is that we'll give you these benefits, but here's the catch. You can't sue us. So, you know, if you fell off my rickety ladder, or you know, whatever, my machinery was defective, I'm sorry, but you can't sue us. You can't have both. And so they called it the grand bargain. And so we modeled the workers' comp system on that. And those were the early stages of workers' compensation.
I love it. Jeff Pettegrew is our guest here on the show. We are broadcasting live at the 2018 Partner Source Conference here at this beautiful Omni Park Hotel. We'll get into some of the guest speakers as well. Coming up, we have a lieutenant colonel that's going to talk about his mission. A lot of people here talking, a lot of educational breakout sessions. What has been some of the feedback you've heard so far?
Well, the thing about any conference, and I'm sure your listeners appreciate this, is that, you get all these minds together, and you're able really to share a lot of stories. And, as you might guess, I'm kind of a storyteller myself. And you really want to know, what have you done in this situation? And we've had this experience, and we've had that experience. And, like anything else, if you're going to improve the way you do business, you want to learn how others have dealt with the problems. And Texas, like any other state, I mean, there are issues, there are concerns, there's challenges. And so this is a great conference to bring these experts together so they can share their ideas, share their concepts, and always technology keeps changing. And you got to remember, too, Ryan, we're in a gig economy here. So the whole employment situation is changing quite a bit. I mean, they're talking about as high as 40% of workers in the United States are going to be in the gig economy. In other words, like the Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, independent contractors, freelancers, and they're not covered by workers' compensation, okay? And they're not covered by the injury benefit program. So, there's a lot of scrutiny about, how's all this going to impact everything? So we're focusing on those employers who do offer an injury benefit program, and we're looking at ways of making that even better.
I love it. Of course, about 1/4 of all Texas employers have accepted negligence and liability exposure for workers' injury. So and you guys are just kind of a nice alternative to what's traditionally been offered. It's something new.
Yeah, it's what really drew my attention to it was the fact that I measure things in the area of injury benefit programs in two simple concepts, which everyone can understand. The first is, what's the efficiencies of the dollars spent? So, Brian, you're injured, and let's say, you're entitled to $1,000. Let's say in total of wages and medical and whatever. Okay, what's that going to cost to get that $1,000 to you? Well, if you go throughout the United States and check all of those programs and run the numbers, it's going to cost about $3.50 to deliver $1. So where does the rest of the money go?
Yeah.
Well, they call it frictional costs. Well, but unfortunately, it's an antagonistic system. There's a lot of angst. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of fighting, battling, dueling docs, as we call it. I mean, it's unfortunate that the system of workers' comp, now over 100 years old, gets into that kind of a situation. On the other hand, when I looked at the injury benefit program here in Texas, again, only in Texas, for those that are in that program, it costs $1.25. Now, there's 25 cents on the dollar to deliver the benefits. So guess what? The benefits are actually richer. They have a higher wage replacement. It's immediate. They have the best medical care. In most states, only a third of the docs will even treat workers' compensation payments. We use every doc we can and the best we can as an example. And the second objective, which I didn't mention, was to get people back to work. So you get them well, you protect their wages, and you get them back to work. Simple formula, right?
You would think. A lot of this is common sense, and I heard this a couple weeks ago, and all of it sounds like a lot of common sense. Coming up, I'll take a break, and Ben at the studio, being totally transparent, I have one thing in common with CNN. Very, very few things in life I have in common with CNN, and one of them is right now. I am doing this broadcast via my phone, which they did yesterday with the bomb scare. So in the break, I'm going to switch over back to the microphone. I think we got that technical issue resolved. Coming up, we got plenty more guests as we're broadcasting live right here at Omni West. We'll be give a few minutes. We'll come right back. Listen to 620 a.m. KEXB, your experts in business.
This is 620 a.m.